For centuries, the town of Zeal holds a history of being brought to its knees. Its streets would be walked by conquering armies, from Roman legion to the Norman army. This is a town that survived its years of war without losing its identity. It knew how to keep its head down. After centuries of boot and blade, the town had found itself being invaded by a new army, a different breed of barbarians. Instead of coming with weapons, they came with cash. Instead of boot, they came with metal boxes. Traveling 40 miles from the city of London, the weekends between May and October brought tourists wanting to satisfy their taste for adventure to experience an ancient world. Not that the zealots were bothered by these invaders, just grateful that they were not spilling blood in the streets. But none of the villagers had anticipated in seeing their lands being taken by these weary travelers, taken in by this need for escape, to pursue this false sense of freedom from the hectic life of a populated city. It wasn't long before these barbarians began conquering the town of Zeal with bids, buying out land, barns, even emptied homes. And as years passed, one by one the natives of this land were picked off by time. The remains of this world was now buried in the ground and forgotten. Unlike the Roman legion, the Norman armies, it was the commuters that had conquered and infected the heart of Zeal. There is history here, my friends. So much neglected history in this quiet, boring town. If these barbarians only knew of this history, the horror that was kept hidden beneath the invading armies. If they only knew the settlers of this land, they would have learned of the horrors that once terrorized Zeal before the invading armies. If they knew of the devil that was confined within its prison, then maybe we would have been spared from an unremitting horror. Reverend Coote, 40 years as a devoted Christian, have felt uneasy since this morning. Something that kept disturbing his sermon writing, troubling his mind, his faith, and had to confess something to Reverend Declan. Hopefully that words can bring shape to this distress. It was like he felt something, like a sign from a higher power, but could not make sense of it. This morning, when he was praying at the altar, Reverend Coote suddenly felt something coursing through his body, like electricity. At first he thought it was an act of God, a visitation, except when he felt the sensation buzzing through his body all the way to his groin, Reverend Coote was bothered by the erection he had, a feeling so powerful and incredibly shameful. Reverend Coote is a man of cloth, dedicated to the mysteries of the Lord. What Reverend Coote experienced this morning was something that he won't claim to be from the Lord. Whatever happened today, it was not Christian, and it was not a sign from the Lord. And Reverend Coote, waiting for a response from Declan, his long years as a devoted Christian, and now comes to a sudden moment when Reverend Coote's faith is shaken and challenged. God help us. God help us. Why would Declan say something like that? As if he knows something to fear. This town, it has history. You see, long before the invading armies, the settlements, there was a temple on this site. And during this time, this place was once a vast forest, large enough to swallow a city, and there were things that owned this land. This was before Christ, before civilization. These were not humans, but things that was stronger. It was after this land was touched by human hand, only one of these things survived. That altar. Beneath the cloth is a scripture of these events. You see, Declan may not have the same electrifying experience as Reverend Coote, but he knows of the experience. He knows of the revelation that's yet to come. The stories are there, in the history books of the beast that is buried. They called it Rawhead. Its head was huge, the color of the moon, and raw like meat. It ate the children, Reverend Coote. It ate all the children. Thomas Garrow, the only son of the late Thomas Garrow. After a liquid lunch at the local tavern, The Tall Man, Thomas maintained his heavy labor of clearing up the 3 acres of neglected land on his property. The hard work of clearing this field from the stones and rusted machinery, remnants of his lazy father. God, how much Thomas despised the hard work of restoring this land, just as much as the hard work his father put him through as a child. But land was money, and having 3 acres wasn't a luxury that many people in Zeal have these days. And the days he spent clearing this land had went well for Thomas, until he happened upon a stone embedded deep into the earth. Staring at this stone, the very thing that stood in his way, something Thomas remembered his father saying about this piece of land, vague bits of memory. For generations the Garrows had never tended to this land. The soil was never to be touched. Nothing could grow on these 3 acres. But Thomas's father was a drunkard, a man who believed in folklore. The land was ripe for plowing, and even though there was something about this stone that made his short hair stand up, a small sense of static coursing through his body. If Thomas lets his father's folklore prevent him from finishing his task, by next year he would lose his 3 acres of land, losing a lot of money. It was no longer about the time he was wasting on this stone, no longer about the 3 acres that needed to be cleared, not the money, not his father. Thomas was now a man with determination. His mind blinked to the rhythmic movement between his body, the spade, and the stone in the earth. Scoop up, push down. Scoop up and push down. Like an automated machine, oblivious to the drops of rain striking his back, oblivious to the time he wasted on a single task. And it was when Thomas saw the stone move, a small tremble of the earth, that woke him from this rhythmic motion. A sudden and unexplained fear that would be followed with a rewarding sense of progress in overcoming this obstacle. Thomas was now a driven man, so determined to achieve conquest, oblivious to the storm above, the heavy rain pouring down his back. The world around him meant nothing compared to the task before him. Victory was so close. Thomas was sure he felt the stone move, a spark of progress. 2 stakes in, and 1 more should be enough. He was so close now. And when striking a 3rd stake into the rock, Thomas's battle against the stone was suddenly interrupted by a nauseating gas erupting from the ground, an air pocket of death seeping into the air, his head swelling and tightening to the foul stench. Whatever was underneath this rock was something animal, a rancid decay that was unlike anything that violated Thomas's sense of smell. And then the stone began to roll. It was now moving on its own, and Thomas watching this event unfold. The stone and earth animated before him. Thomas's fear was dulled out by this possessive need for the spade that was near the hole, hindering him from fleeing. And as the hole began sucking in the dirt in the air, exposing more of the nauseating gas, like a geyser, Thomas could have left. But a man who was so possessive of his land, his property, a victim to his own pride. It was when the spade came out of the hole, but not in the possession of Thomas. For Thomas Garrow, there was no sense in heaven or earth. Thomas had suddenly lost the will to let go of the spade, his mind trying to escape the horror that was unfolding before him, the nauseating stench filling the air, dulling his senses, his body frozen with fear. A strange feeling that violated this man's mind and body when witnessing the creature pulling itself from the ground. Thomas Garrow had just stood there. Nothing within him but awe and fear, and this terrible sensation that he never felt in years, far more carnal than the wild and drunken nights he enjoyed during his younger years. These filthy urges infecting his mind, his thoughts urging him to enjoy such fantasies that never crossed his mind. And yet, could it be that these thoughts were there all along, kept hidden away? Thomas Garrow knew that death was coming when seeing the creature's dominant form before him. Despite the crippling fear, he welcomed the creature as it grabbed his head, feeling the claws digging into the flesh of his scalp. Thomas Garrow was scared, not by the monster, but by these urges and offering himself to the monster's sadistic need for pleasure, to see his flesh violated in such violent and filthy ways. Thomas wanted to be violated. There was no God, no devil, only his king, only Rawhead. The last thing Thomas remembered, his final moments, was gazing up at Rawhead's pitiless face, entranced by its moon-shaped head, the slanted eyes looking down at this pitiful waste of human flesh, the two flickering holes, and a mouth that seemed like it would split open his massive head, decorated with rows of jagged teeth, just waiting to tear into flesh and feed an appetite for meat and terror. The last thoughts of Thomas Garrow was the glorious sight of witnessing the moon splitting into two. It was so magnificent. Thomas Garrow felt nothing but pain and fear of the filthy act of coming in his pants as the creature ripped the flesh off Thomas's scalp and drive him head first into the grave that his forefathers had intended to bury Rawhead forever. By the time the storm had passed over Zeal, Rawhead Rex was already a mile away, excited to inflict its love for carnal and sadistic pleasure upon this new and strange world. It ate the children. It ate the children. Sam's new pet. Sam stayed with his grandmother when his parents went to Mexico for their vacation. "We're going to bring you back something nice," his mother told him. "It'll be a surprise." Before they came home, Sam's parents looked for something Sam would like. All they could find was a beautiful sombrero. It cost too much. But that afternoon, while they were eating their lunch in the park, they decided to buy a sombrero after all. Sam's father threw what was left of their sandwiches to some stray dogs, and they walked back to the marketplace. One of the animals followed them. It was a small, gray creature with short hair, short legs, and a long tail. Wherever they went, it went. "Isn't he cute?" Sam's mother said. "He must be one of those Mexican hairless dogs. Sam will love him." "He's probably somebody's pet," Sam's father said. They asked several people if they knew who its owner was, but no one did. They just smiled and shrugged their shoulders. Finally, Sam's mother said, "Maybe he's just a stray. Let's take him home with us. We can give him a good home and Sam will love him." It's against the law to take pets across the border. But Sam's parents hid the animal in a box, and no one saw it. When they got home, they showed it to Sam. "He's a pretty small dog," said Sam. "He's a Mexican dog," his father said. "I'm not sure what kind. I think it's called a Mexican hairless. We'll find out. But he's nice, isn't he?" They gave the new pet some dog food. Then they washed it and brushed it and combed its fur. That night it slept on Sam's bed. When Sam awakened the next moment, his pet was still there. "Mother," he called, "the dog has a cold." The animal's eyes were running, and there was something white around its mouth. Later that morning, Sam's mother took it to the veterinarian. "Where did you get him?" the vet asked. "In Mexico," she said. "We think he's a Mexican hairless. I was going to ask you about that." "He's not a hairless," the vet said. "He's not even a dog. He's a sewer rat. And he has rabies."